In the Word, we learn that God is faithful. A clear depiction of God's faithfulness is found in 1 Kings 17, as God provides for the needs of the prophet Elijah, a widow, and her son. During this time, Israel was under the leadership of a seemingly endless succession of oppressive kings. The king in authority during Elijah's time was King Ahab. It is recorded in 1 Kings 16:33 that King Ahab did more to provoke the Lord, the God of Israel, to anger than did all the kings before him. God was disgusted with Israel's unfaithfulness and worship of the false god Baal. God sent Elijah to King Ahab to prophesy a famine in the land. God wanted to show the people that he controlled the weather, not Baal. Although the famine devastated the land that Elijah depended on for life, God had to plan to show his faithfulness in an unexpected way. In verse 3, God instructs Elijah to travel to a brook and orders ravens to feed him there. However, God did not intend for Elijah to depend on this miracle forever. In verse 7, we learn that the brook dried up. It appeared that God had forgotten about Elijah, but God was divinely arranging a miraculous display of his faithful provision that Elijah would have never seen if he had continued to depend on the brook for his nourishment. God promised Elijah that his next meal would come through a widow. When Elijah found the widow at the city gate, he asked for a jar of water and a piece of bread. But in verse 12, the widow said, "I don't have any bread, only a handful of flour in a jar and a little oil in a jug. I am gathering a few sticks to take to my home and make a meal for myself and my son, that we may eat it and die." Although the widow was preparing for death, God was already working out a different plan. Elijah must have been confused. Why did the Lord lead him here to a widow who only had a little more than he did? But in verse 14, the Lord spoke through Elijah and said, "The jar of flour will not be used up, and the jug of oil will not run dry, until the day the Lord gives rain on the land." Elijah instructed the widow to use the little food that she had left so that God could demonstrate his faithfulness to multiply it. The widow obeyed and experienced the faithful provision of Jehovah Jireh, the God who provides. In verses 15 and 16, it says, "There was food every day for Elijah and for the woman and her family, for the jar of flour was not used up and the jug of oil did not run dry, in keeping with the word the Lord had spoken by Elijah." God has also shown me his faithfulness in times of crisis. I did not fully start living for Christ until my sophomore year of high school in 2010. And during that year, 3 of my greatest spiritual influences unexpectedly died. I was confused and frustrated and angry with God, and I often doubted him and his character. But through this time, I felt like God kept whispering to me, "Claire, will you see that I am faithful even when it seems like everything is falling apart? Will you proclaim my faithfulness when I give and when I take away?" God showed me during this time who he is, and that just who his character is, and that he desires to provide for me even when I can't see it. 2 Timothy 2:13 says, "If we are faithless, he will remain faithful, for he cannot deny himself." Psalm 33:4 says, "He is faithful in all he does." God was faithful, he is faithful, and he will always be faithful. The great I am is faithful. God is the great I am.
You are